The copper-haired girl standing on the auction block wasn't there to be sold, but that didn't stop the crowd from treating her like livestock anyway. Willow Victoria held her chin high, despite the jeers coming from the gathered townsfolk of Coloma, California. It was the spring of 1862, and she had made the mistake of applying for the position of schoolteacher at the town meeting. The mayor had insisted she present herself publicly, so the community could assess whether she was suitable to educate their children. What should have been a simple introduction had devolved into a spectacle of cruelty. "Look at all them freckles," a woman's voice called out, like someone splattered mud across her face. "That hair," another added with a harsh laugh, "red as the devil himself." My grandmother always said red hair was a mark of wickedness. Willow's hands trembled at her sides, but she kept them still through sheer force of will. She had heard such comments her entire life, first in Boston where she had grown up, and now here in this rough mining town where she had hoped to make a fresh start. Her mother had died 2 years ago, her father 3 months past, and the small inheritance had been just enough to buy passage west and a few months' living expenses. She needed this teaching position desperately. "I have my credentials from the Boston Female Academy," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd despite the quaver she couldn't quite suppress. "I have studied literature, mathematics, geography, and pedagogy. I can provide your children with a quality education." "We don't need no fancy Boston education," a man shouted. "We need someone who looks respectable, someone who won't frighten the children." The mayor, a portly man named Henderson, shifted uncomfortably on the platform beside her. "Now, Miss Victoria does have impressive qualifications on paper." "Paper don't mean nothing when she looks like that," someone else yelled. "Them freckles probably go all the way down, probably covered in spots like a leopard." The crowd erupted in laughter, and Willow felt heat rush to her cheeks. She knew her face was probably turning as red as her hair, which only made the freckles stand out more. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her cry. A movement at the edge of the crowd caught her attention. A man was pushing through the gathered townsfolk, his broad shoulders clearing a path. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips. Everything about him spoke of hard living and harder work, but it was his eyes that struck her. They were an unusual shade of amber, warm and bright in his weathered face. He strode right up to the platform and turned to face the crowd. "That's enough." His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made people quiet down. The crowd shifted, a few men grumbling, but the jeering stopped. "Xavier Irving," Mayor Henderson said, surprise evident in his tone. "Didn't expect to see you in town. Thought you were out on the range." "Brought in a herd for Callahan," Xavier said, his eyes scanning the crowd with clear disapproval. "Heard the commotion from the saloon. Figured I'd see what was worth making such a fuss about." He turned then and looked directly at Willow. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. He studied her face, her hair, her freckles, all the things people had been mocking. But there was no mockery in his expression, no disgust or amusement. Instead, something shifted in his features, a softening around his eyes. "You're the sunrise I've been waiting for," he said. The words were quiet, almost reverent, and for a moment Willow thought she had misheard him. The crowd seemed equally confused, a murmur of puzzled voices rising. "What's that supposed to mean?" someone called out. Xavier didn't take his eyes off Willow. "Means I've been working cattle for 15 years, getting up before dawn every single day. I've seen maybe 5,000 sunrises, and every one starts the same. Darkness giving way to light, the sky turning colors. First purple, then pink, then this particular shade of gold that only lasts a few minutes. That gold light hits the hills and makes everything glow like the world's on fire, but a good fire, the kind that warms rather than burns. He gestured toward Willow's hair. That's the color of her hair. Like sunrise. And those freckles everyone's so bothered by, they're like the stars that are still visible when the sun first comes up. Last bits of night scattered across morning sky. The crowd had gone completely silent. Willow stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This stranger, this cowboy covered in trail dust, was defending her. More than defending, he was saying things that made her heart hammer in her chest. Now I don't know anything about teaching credentials or Boston academies, Xavier continued, addressing the crowd again. But I know this town needs a schoolteacher real bad. Half the children here can barely write their own names, and I know that courage counts for something. This woman stood up here and took your mockery without running, without backing down. That's the kind of strength you want teaching your kids. Someone who won't quit when things get hard. Easy for you to say, Irving, a woman in the crowd spoke up. You don't have children. You don't understand a mother's concerns. My mother would have taken a switch to any one of us if we'd spoken to a lady the way you all just did, Xavier replied. She raised 5 boys on her own after Pa died, and she did it with grace and dignity. Taught us that character matters more than appearance. Seems like some of you could stand to learn that lesson yourselves. Mayor Henderson cleared his throat. Well, this is certainly an unexpected turn. Perhaps we should take a vote. All in favor of offering Miss Victoria the teaching position. A scattering of hands went up, fewer than half. Willow's heart sank. It wasn't enough. All opposed, more hands rose, but Xavier spoke before the count could be finalized. What's the salary for the position? $40 a month plus room in the teacherage, Henderson answered. I'll add another $20 a month from my own pocket, Xavier said. That'll make it $60 total, better than most teachers in California earn. And I'll personally ensure the schoolhouse is kept in good repair. I'll fix the roof before winter, make sure the stove works proper, and keep the wood box full. Why would you do that? Henderson asked, bewildered. Xavier glanced at Willow again, and she saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. Because it's the right thing to do. And because I meant what I said, she's the sunrise I've been waiting for. The crowd erupted in speculation and gossip, but the mayor called for order. That's a generous offer, Irving. Let's vote again. All in favor. This time more hands went up, enough to constitute a majority. Whether it was Xavier's offer or his shaming of the crowd, Willow didn't know, but the result was the same. She had the position. Motion carries, Henderson announced. Miss Victoria, you'll start teaching on Monday next. That gives you a week to prepare the schoolhouse and settle in. The crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with conversation. Willow stood on the platform, her legs suddenly weak. She had won, but she didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed and confused by the cowboy who had just changed everything. Xavier approached the platform, extending his hand to help her down. Madam. She took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Thank you, she managed. I don't know why you did that, but thank you. Told you why, he said simply. You all right? I think so, she said, though her voice shook. That was horrible. The things they said. People fear what's different, Xavier said, and they're especially cruel when they're afraid. But you held your ground. That took courage. I didn't have much choice, Willow said. I need this position. I have no family, no other prospects. If I hadn't gotten this job, I would have been destitute. Something flickered in his eyes, concern perhaps, or understanding. You have family now, even if you don't know it yet. Coloma's not as bad as what you saw today. There are good people here. They just needed reminding of their manners. You didn't have to spend your money, Willow said. $20 a month is a significant sum. I can afford it, Xavier said. I run a good operation and cattle prices are high with the war back east. Union Army needs beef, and I've got beef to sell. Besides, it's an investment in the town. Better educated children make for a better community. He spoke practically, but Willow sensed there was more to it than that. The way he had looked at her, the things he had said about Sunrise, those weren't the words of a man making a simple business investment. Where is the teacherage? She asked, partly to change the subject, partly because she genuinely needed to know. Behind the schoolhouse, other end of town, Xavier said. I'll walk you there if you'd like, help you carry your things. I only have one trunk, Willow said. It's at the boarding house where I've been staying. We'll fetch it then, Xavier said. Come on. They walked through the dusty streets of Coloma, past storefronts and saloons, mining supply shops and the assay office. It was a small town, swollen with the remnants of the gold rush that had brought thousands to California more than a decade ago. Most of the easy gold was gone now, but enough miners remained to keep the town alive, supplemented by ranchers and farmers who had realized there was more reliable wealth in feeding miners than in mining itself. People stared as they passed, and Willow heard whispers. She tried to ignore them, but it was difficult. Xavier seemed unbothered by the attention, walking with an easy confidence that suggested he was used to being noticed. Have you lived in Coloma long? Willow asked, wanting to fill the silence. About 10 years, Xavier said. Came west with my brothers after our mother passed. We worked in the mines for a bit, saved our money, then bought land and started ranching, built it up from nothing to one of the bigger operations in the county. You have brothers here, 2 of them, Xavier said. Xander's running the ranch while I'm in town. Our youngest brother, Xerxes, he's out checking the line camps. Other 2 brothers went north to Oregon, started their own spreads up there. We're spread out now, but we stay in touch. Xerxes is an unusual name, Willow observed. Xavier smiled slightly. My mother was a schoolteacher herself, loved history and classical education. All us boys got named from her books. Xander's full name is Alexander, and I'm Xavier after the saint. She had grand plans for us, wanted us to be educated men. We disappointed her some by choosing ranching over books, but she came to understand it was what we needed to do. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Willow said softly. She was, Xavier agreed. You remind me of her a bit. That same steel spine, the determination. She wouldn't have let a crowd like that run her off either. They reached the boarding house, a weathered 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. The woman met them at the door, her expression curious. Miss Victoria, she said, I heard about the town meeting. Congratulations on securing the position. Thank you, Willow said. I've come to collect my trunk. Of course, Mrs. Patterson said, but her eyes were on Xavier. Mr. Irving, nice to see you. It's been a while. Mrs. Patterson, Xavier said with a polite nod. I'm helping Miss Victoria move her things to the teacherage. How kind of you, the woman said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Whatever reputation Xavier had in this town, it seemed to be a good one. Willow's room was on the 2nd floor, small but clean. Xavier lifted her trunk easily, carrying it down the stairs as if it weighed nothing. Willow gathered her few other belongings, a carpet bag with her personal items and a small box containing her most precious possessions, the books her mother had given her. They walked to the other end of town where the schoolhouse stood, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower. The teacherage was behind it, a tiny cabin with 1 room. Inside was a narrow bed, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs and little else. It was sparse, but it was clean, and most importantly, it was hers. Xavier set the trunk down and looked around. "Needs work," he said. "Roof's got some gaps and that stove pipe needs replacing. I'll come by tomorrow and fix things up." "You don't have to do that," Willow protested. "You've already done so much." "I said I'd maintain the schoolhouse and teacherage," Xavier reminded her. "I meant it. Besides, can't have you freezing when winter comes. These mountains get cold, and that stove won't do you any good if the pipe's cracked." He walked to the door, then paused, turning back to look at her. "Miss Victoria, what happened today at that meeting, the things people said, you shouldn't let it define how you see this town or yourself. You're a beautiful woman, and anyone with eyes can see that. The problem's not with you, it's with them." Willow felt her cheeks warm. "You don't have to say that." "I don't say things I don't mean," Xavier said quietly. "When I saw you up on that platform, taking their cruelty with your head held high, hair shining in the sun like captured fire, I thought you were the most striking woman I'd ever seen. Still think that." He left before she could respond, closing the door gently behind him. Willow stood in the small cabin, her heart racing, her mind reeling. The day had been a whirlwind, from public humiliation to unexpected salvation, and at the center of it all was a cowboy with amber eyes who spoke of sunrises and meant every word. She sat down on the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to cry, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something else she couldn't quite name. For the first time in months, since her father had died and left her alone in the world, she felt a spark of something that might have been hope. The next morning, Willow woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly in one of her simple day dresses and stepped outside to find Xavier on the roof of the teacherage, replacing shingles. He had shed his coat, working in his shirt and vest, and even from the ground she could see the focus in his movements, the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Good morning," she called up. He paused and looked down at her, shading his eyes against the sun. "Morning." "Hope I didn't wake you." "It's all right," Willow said. "I should have been up anyway. There's work to do in the schoolhouse." "Give me another hour and I'll help you with that," Xavier said. "Want to finish this roof while the weather's clear." "You must have your own work to do," Willow said. "Your ranch, your cattle." "Xander's handling things," Xavier said. "We've got good men working for us. They don't need me breathing down their necks every minute. Besides, I told you I'd take care of repairs and I don't go back on my word." Willow went into the schoolhouse to assess what needed to be done. The interior was dusty from disuse, the previous teacher having left 3 months ago to get married. Desks were scattered haphazardly, slates were piled in a corner, and the blackboard was so covered in chalk residue it was nearly white. She found a broom and began sweeping, working up a cloud of dust that made her cough. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear Xavier come in until he spoke. "Here, let me help." He took the broom from her hands and made quick work of the floor, his long strokes efficient and thorough. Then he helped her arrange the desks in neat rows, repair a broken chair, and clean the blackboard. They worked in companionable silence for a while, and Willow found herself sneaking glances at him, studying his profile, the way he moved. "Why did you really help me yesterday?" she asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Xavier paused in his work, a desk halfway to its position. "I told you why." "You said I was the sunrise you'd been waiting for," Willow said. "That's not a normal thing to say to a stranger." He set the desk down and turned to face her fully. "No, I suppose it's not. Truth is, Miss Victoria, I've been alone a long time. Oh, I've got my brothers and the ranch hands. I've got work and purpose, but that's not the same as having someone to share life with. I'm 32 years old, and I've never met a woman who made me feel anything beyond passing interest. Then I saw you standing up there, brave and scared all at once, and something in me just knew." "Knew what?" Willow asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you were someone worth knowing," Xavier said. "Someone worth fighting for. Maybe I'm a fool for saying all this so soon, for being so forward, but life's too short to pretend. I learned that when my mother died. She spent too much time working and worrying, not enough time living. I don't aim to make that same mistake." Willow's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I don't know what to say. This is all so sudden. I only arrived in Coloma a week ago, and yesterday was the first time I saw you." "I know," Xavier said. "And I'm not asking for anything from you, not yet. I'm just being honest about my intentions. I'd like to court you properly if you're willing. I'd like to get to know you and let you get to know me. No pressure, no expectations beyond spending time together. What do you say?" Willow thought about Boston, about the young men there who had occasionally expressed interest before learning about her lack of significant dowry. She thought about the men on the wagon train west who had looked at her with hunger but never respect. She thought about the crowd yesterday, mocking her appearance, treating her as less than human. Then she looked at Xavier, at the sincerity in his amber eyes, at the way he stood there offering her something precious. His honest intentions with no games or manipulation. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like to get to know you too." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Good. Then let's start simple. Have dinner with me tonight. There's a restaurant at the hotel, nothing fancy but the food's decent. We can talk, learn about each other." "All right," Willow agreed and felt her own smile forming. "What time?" 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, she confirmed. They finished preparing the schoolhouse together, and by afternoon it looked transformed. The room was clean and organized, ready for students. Xavier had even repaired the bell rope so it worked properly again. As they stood back to survey their work, Willow felt a sense of accomplishment and something else, a feeling of partnership, of working alongside someone who treated her as an equal. That evening, she dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue cotton with small buttons up the front. It wasn't fancy by Boston standards, but it was well made and flattering. She brushed her hair until it shone, then pinned it up in a simple style. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror and tried to see what Xavier saw, but all she could see were the freckles, the too bright hair, the pale skin that never tanned. "You're the sunrise I've been waiting for." His words echoed in her mind, and she tried to hold on to them, to let them shield her from her own doubts. Xavier arrived exactly at 6, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt. He offered his arm, and they walked together to the hotel restaurant. People stared as they passed, and Willow heard murmurs, but Xavier's steady presence beside her made it easier to ignore. The restaurant was small but pleasant, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a warm glow. The proprietor seated them at a corner table, and Xavier ordered for them both beef stew and fresh bread, coffee and apple pie. "Tell me about Boston," Xavier said once they were settled. "What was your life like there?" Willow told him about growing up in a small house near the Common, about her father's work as a clerk, about her mother's determination to see her educated. She spoke of the female academy, of her love for books and learning, of her dreams of teaching. And she told him about the losses, her mother's sudden illness, her father's slower decline into grief and then death. "I had nothing left there," she said quietly. "The house was rented, the belongings sold to pay debts. I had just enough money to come west and start over. Teaching is all I know how to do, and I'm good at it, or I will be given the chance." "You'll be a fine teacher," Xavier said with certainty. "The children are lucky to have you." "What about you?" Willow asked. Tell me about your life, about ranching." Xavier spoke of the land, of the challenges of running cattle in California's varied terrain. He told her about the drought years and the flood years, about losing stock to mountain lions and bears, about the satisfaction of building something from nothing. He spoke of his brothers, the closeness they shared despite being spread across hundreds of miles, and he told her about his dreams of expanding the ranch, of building something that would last beyond his lifetime. "I want sons and daughters to pass it on to," he said. "I want to build a legacy, a place where family can put down roots and thrive for generations. But none of that means much without the right partner. A ranch is too much for one person. It needs two people working together, supporting each other." He looked at her intently across the table. "I'm not a romantic man by nature, Miss Victoria. I don't write poetry or make grand gestures. But I know what I want, and I know what I'm willing to work for. I meant what I said yesterday. You're the sunrise I've been waiting for. I felt it the moment I saw you, something I can't explain but can't deny either." "You barely know me," Willow protested, though her heart raced at his words. "I know enough," Xavier said. "I know you're brave and determined. I know you value education and hard work. I know you stood up to mockery and cruelty without breaking. That tells me more than a year of casual conversation ever could." "I could be terrible in a dozen ways you haven't discovered yet," Willow said, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. Xavier's lips quirked in a small smile. "Then I guess we'll discover them together. I'm sure I've got plenty of faults you haven't seen yet either. I can be stubborn as a mule, I work too much, and I've got a temper, though I keep it controlled most times. But faults don't scare me. It's indifference that worries me, and I don't feel indifferent about you at all." They talked through dinner and dessert, through multiple cups of coffee, and Willow found herself relaxing in his company. Xavier was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He asked her about teaching methods, about books she loved, about her views on everything from politics to religion. And he listened, really listened, weighing her words with care. When he finally walked her home, the streets were dark and quiet. He stopped at her door, standing close enough that she could smell sage and leather and something uniquely him. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "I haven't enjoyed an evening this much in years." "Neither have I," Willow admitted. "Can I see you again, maybe Sunday after church? We could take a ride and I could show you the ranch." "I'd like that," Willow said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. He raised it to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and intimate. "Good night, Willow," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. "Good night, Xavier," she replied. She went inside and leaned against the door, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. She had been in Coloma for barely more than a week, and already her entire life had changed. She was employed, she had a home, and she had a cowboy with amber eyes who looked at her like she was something precious. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Willow prepared lesson plans for students she hadn't met yet, organized the limited books and supplies available, and gradually made the teacherage feel like home. Xavier came by every day, always with some excuse, fixing something or bringing supplies, but really just spending time with her. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests and different perspectives. Xavier told her stories of life on the range, of cattle drives and roundups, of sleeping under stars and waking to frost. Willow shared her love of literature, reading passages from her precious books, and was delighted when Xavier listened with genuine interest, even to poetry he claimed not to understand. On Sunday, they went to church together, and Willow felt the weight of every stare, heard every whispered comment. But Xavier's presence beside her made it bearable. After the service, they rode out to his ranch, Xavier on his sturdy quarter horse and Willow on a gentle mare he had borrowed from a neighbor. The ranch was beautiful, sprawling across rolling hills with mountains rising in the distance. The house was solid and well built, larger than Willow had expected, with a wide porch and glass windows. Xavier showed her around with obvious pride, pointing out improvements he and his brothers had made, explaining his plans for expansion. "It's wonderful," Willow said honestly. "You've built something remarkable." "It's empty," Xavier said quietly. "A house is just a building without people to make it a home." They stood on the porch looking out at the land, and Willow felt something shift inside her. This could be her life, her home. This man standing beside her could be her future. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I'm falling in love with you," Xavier said suddenly. "I know it's too soon to say such things. I know I should wait and be proper about it, but I've never been good at hiding what I feel. Every day I spend with you, I'm more certain that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Willow turned to look at him, her heart in her throat. "Xavier, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for an answer or a commitment. I just wanted you to know how I feel. I want to be honest with you always." "I'm frightened," Willow admitted. "Everything is happening so fast. A week ago I was alone in the world, terrified of what would become of me. Now I have a job and a home and you, and it feels too good to be true. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Life doesn't come with guarantees," Xavier said, "but I can promise you this. I'll work every day to be worthy of your trust. I'll support your teaching. I'll protect you from anyone who tries to hurt you, and I'll never make you feel less than the remarkable woman you are." Willow felt tears prick her eyes. "No one's ever spoken to me the way you do. No one's ever made me feel valuable just for being myself." "Then they were fools," Xavier said fiercely. "You are valuable, Willow. You're intelligent and brave and beautiful, and any man would be lucky to have you in his life." She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me, but I can't deny what I feel." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Willow rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, while the sun moved slowly across the sky. The following Monday, Willow's first day of teaching arrived. She woke early, dressed in her most professional outfit, and walked to the schoolhouse with her stomach churning with nerves. Xavier had wanted to accompany her, but she had insisted on going alone. This was something she needed to do by herself. 15 children showed up, ranging in age from 6 to 14. They stared at her with open curiosity, whispering to each other about her hair and freckles. Willow took a deep breath and rang the bell to call them to order. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "My name is Miss Victoria, and I'm your new teacher. I know I look different than what you might be used to, and I know some of your parents have concerns about me. But I promise you this. I will work hard to give you the best education I can. I will be fair and patient, and I will treat each of you with respect. In return, I ask that you do your best and treat each other with kindness. Can we agree to that?" A few children nodded. Others looked uncertain. A girl of about 12 raised her hand. "Yes," Willow said. "Is it true what they say, that red hair is unlucky?" Willow could have deflected the question, but she chose honesty instead. "Some people believe that, but it's just superstition. My hair is red because of something called pigmentation. It's no more unlucky than brown or blonde. In fact, some cultures consider red hair to be blessed, a sign of strength and courage." "I think your hair is pretty," a small girl in the front row said shyly. "It's like a sunset." "Sunrise," another child corrected. "Mr. Irving said it's like sunrise." Mr. Irving talks a lot about Miss Victoria, an older boy said with a knowing grin. My pa says he's courting her. That's enough gossip, Willow said firmly, but she couldn't help the warmth that spread through her chest. Let's begin with mathematics. I want to assess what each of you knows so I can plan appropriate lessons. The day was challenging but rewarding. The children were at wildly different skill levels, some barely literate while others were surprisingly advanced. Willow took careful notes, planning in her mind how to divide them into groups, how to challenge the advanced students while supporting those who were struggling. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted but satisfied. The children filed out and she was cleaning the blackboard when she heard someone enter. She turned to find Xavier leaning against the doorframe, smiling. How did it go? He asked. Well, I think, Willow said. The children are sweet, though some are quite far behind where they should be. But they're eager to learn, and that's what matters most. I knew you'd do fine, Xavier said. He held up a basket. Brought you lunch. Figured you'd be too busy to eat. He had figured correctly. Willow had been so nervous she had skipped breakfast, and hunger was making her lightheaded. They sat on the schoolhouse steps and shared the meal, cold chicken and biscuits, apples and cheese. The children asked about you, Willow said. Apparently the whole town knows you're courting me. Does that bother you? Xavier asked. No, Willow said, surprising herself with how true it was. Let them talk. I'm done caring what people think of me. Good, Xavier said with approval. You're too fine a woman to waste time on small-minded gossip. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Willow taught during the day, pouring her energy into her students. Xavier came by each afternoon, sometimes to help with repairs or chores, sometimes just to talk. In the evenings, they would sit on the teacherage porch, watching the sun set, discussing everything and nothing. Slowly, the town began to accept Willow. Some people remained cold, but others warmed to her, especially when their children came home excited about what they had learned. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house began inviting Willow to tea. The shopkeeper gave her a fair price on supplies without the gouging he apparently practiced on strangers. A few women from church started including her in conversations, but it was Xavier's steady presence that made the biggest difference. His acceptance of her gave others permission to do the same, and more than that, his love gave her confidence. She no longer saw her reflection and felt shame. Instead, she saw what Xavier saw, someone strong and capable and, yes, beautiful in her own way. 2 months after her arrival in Coloma, Xavier asked her to go on a picnic. It was a Saturday, and he had packed a full meal in his saddlebags. They rode out to a meadow high in the hills, where wildflowers bloomed in carpets of gold and purple. The view stretched for miles, mountains and valleys, forests and streams, all of it bathed in autumn sunshine. They spread a blanket and ate, talking and laughing, more comfortable with each other than Willow had ever been with anyone. After they finished eating, Xavier stood and offered his hand. Walk with me. They wandered through the meadow, and Xavier pointed out landmarks, telling her the history of the land, the stories his mother had told him about the people who had lived here before the miners came. He spoke with respect for the native peoples, acknowledging the injustice of how they had been treated, pushed off their ancestral lands by the flood of settlers seeking gold. My mother made sure we understood that this land wasn't empty when we claimed it, Xavier said. That we have a responsibility to honor those who came before, to be good stewards of what we've been given. Some folks thought she was strange for teaching us that way, but I'm grateful for it. Keeps me humble. They reached a spot where a creek tumbled over rocks, creating a small waterfall. Xavier stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Willow Victoria, I've loved you from the moment I saw you standing up to that crowd. Every day since has only made me more certain that you're the woman I want to spend my life with. I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards, but I'm a man who trusts his instincts, and every instinct I have says you're my future." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a ring. It was simple gold with a small ruby, warm and glowing in the light. "This was my mother's ring," Xavier said. "She made me promise before she died that I would give it to a woman who was worthy of it, a woman of intelligence and courage and heart. You're that woman, Willow. Will you marry me?" Willow's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, yes, Xavier, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and passionate all at once, full of promise and hope, and Willow felt like she was melting into him, becoming part of something bigger than herself. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "You've made me the happiest man alive." "You saved me," Willow whispered. "You saw me when everyone else just saw something to mock. You gave me hope when I had none left." "You saved yourself," Xavier corrected gently. "You were strong enough to stand up there and face them down. I just recognized what was already there." They rode back to town as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, and that particular gold that Xavier loved, the color of her hair. When they reached Coloma, Xavier announced their engagement to everyone they passed, pride evident in his voice. Some people congratulated them warmly, others looked surprised, but Xavier didn't care. He was openly, joyfully in love, and he wanted the world to know. They were married a month later in the small church, with Xavier's brothers riding in from the ranch, and even the two from Oregon making the journey south. Willow wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, with small flowers from the meadow woven into her red hair. Xavier wore his best suit, scrubbed and shining, his amber eyes bright with emotion. When the preacher asked if Xavier would take Willow as his wife, he answered in a clear, firm voice that carried through the church. "I will. She's the sunrise I've been waiting for, and I'll spend every day of my life proving worthy of her light." Willow's vows were equally heartfelt. "I was lost when I came here, alone and afraid. You showed me that I was neither ugly nor unwanted, that I had value just as I am. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. I promised to stand beside you, to build a life with you, to love you faithfully all my days." There was hardly a dry eye in the church. Even some of the people who had mocked Willow at that first town meeting were crying. The wedding breakfast was held at the hotel, and the whole town turned out. Xavier's brothers regaled everyone with embarrassing stories from his childhood, and Willow laughed until her sides hurt. She danced with Xavier while a fiddler played, held close in his arms, feeling like she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, Xavier carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, their house now. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood there for a moment, taking in the significance of the moment. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving," he said softly. "It's a beautiful home," Willow said, looking around at the sturdy furniture, the stone fireplace, the windows that let in the moonlight. "It's perfect now," Xavier said. "Now that you're in it." They spent their wedding night discovering each other, gentle and passionate by turns, learning the map of each other's bodies, the sounds of pleasure and contentment. Willow had been nervous, but Xavier was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally lay tangled together, exhausted and happy, Willow thought she had never felt more complete. The next morning, Willow woke in the big bed to find Xavier already up, making breakfast. She dressed in one of the simple day dresses she had brought with her and went to join him in the kitchen. "You don't have to cook," she said. That's supposed to be my job now. We're partners, Xavier said, flipping eggs in the pan. We share the work. Besides, I've been cooking for myself for years. I'm not half bad at it. They ate together at the kitchen table, planning their day. Willow would need to continue teaching at least until the end of the school year. Xavier had arranged for one of the ranch hands to take her to and from the schoolhouse each day, though he would do it himself whenever possible. Eventually, you may not want to keep teaching, Xavier said. If we have children, that might take up your time. But if you want to continue, we'll figure it out. I meant what I said about this being a partnership. I love teaching, Willow said, but I also want a family. We'll balance it somehow. She continued teaching through that year and the next, earning the respect of even her harshest critics as her students excelled under her instruction. Several of the older students who had been barely literate when she started became proficient readers and writers. A boy who had struggled with mathematics grasped the concepts under her patient guidance and began helping younger students. Meanwhile, Willow learned the rhythms of ranch life. She couldn't help with the heavy outdoor work, but she managed the household accounts, helped with the bookkeeping, and took over the large garden that provided vegetables for the ranch. She learned to ride better, venturing out with Xavier when he checked fences or moved cattle between pastures. His brothers became her brothers too. Xander, just a year younger than Xavier, was quieter but deeply loyal. Xerxes, only 23, was exuberant and funny, always ready with a joke or a wild story. The brothers from Oregon visited when they could, and Willow loved the way they all fell back into easy camaraderie, teasing and supporting each other in equal measure. In the spring of 1864, Willow discovered she was pregnant. Xavier's joy was boundless. He became even more protective, worrying about her riding, about her continuing to teach, about everything. Willow found it endearing even when it was frustrating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know," Xavier said, "but you're carrying our child, the most precious thing in the world. Let me fuss a little." She let him fuss, understanding it was how he showed love. And truthfully, the pregnancy was harder than she had expected. She was sick for months, exhausted all the time, and eventually had to stop teaching earlier than she had planned. The town hired a temporary teacher to finish the year, and Willow focused on preparing for the baby. Their son was born on a cold November night, arriving in a rush after hours of difficult labor. Xavier held Willow's hand through it all, murmuring encouragement, wiping her forehead with cool cloths. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Willow's arms, Xavier had tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Xavier whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "You're perfect. I love you so much." They named him William Xavier Irving, and he was indeed perfect. He had Xavier's amber eyes and Willow's red hair, a combination that made him striking even as an infant. Xavier was a devoted father, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding and talking to his son. Willow returned to teaching when William was 6 months old, bringing him to school with her. He would sleep in a basket while she taught, and the students loved having a baby in the classroom. It was unconventional, but it worked. 2 years later, their second son was born, another difficult birth but worth every moment. They named him Winston Xander Irving, and he looked more like Willow, with her pale skin and freckles along with the red hair. Xavier adored him just as much as William, declaring both boys the finest sons a man could want. Life settled into a beautiful pattern. The ranch prospered, expanding as Xavier bought more land and increased the herd. Willow continued teaching, earning a reputation as one of the best educators in the county. William and Winston grew strong and bright, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping their father around the ranch even when they were tiny. More children arrived, a daughter they named Wendy Rose in 1868 and twin boys in 1870, Walter and Wesley. The house was full of noise and love, chaos and laughter. Xavier's brothers were constant presences, uncles who spoiled the children shamelessly and helped with the endless work of raising both cattle and kids. Willow watched her children grow with fierce pride. She made sure they were educated, teaching them herself in addition to their regular schooling. But more than academics, she taught them kindness and resilience. She told them about coming to Coloma, about being mocked and finding courage, about their father who had seen beauty where others saw fault. "You come from love," she told them. "Your father looked at me and saw sunrise. He gave me hope when I had none, showed me my worth when I couldn't see it myself. That's the kind of love I want you to understand, the kind that builds up rather than tears down." The children understood. They grew up watching their parents' partnership, seeing how Xavier consulted Willow on ranch decisions, how Willow trusted Xavier's instincts, how they supported and cherished each other. It became their model for what love should be. Years passed, and the children grew. William became a fine rancher, working alongside his father and uncles. Winston showed academic inclinations, eventually going to San Francisco to study law, though he always came home to visit. Wendy married a kind young rancher from a neighboring spread, and the twins took over a section of the ranch, running it with innovation and skill. Xavier and Willow grew older together, his dark hair going gray, her red fading to a softer copper streaked with white. But when he looked at her, Willow still saw the same warmth in his amber eyes that had been there that first day. They celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1884, surrounded by children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors. The house was packed with people, and Willow stood on the porch looking out at the gathering, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. Xavier came up beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm the luckiest woman alive," Willow said. 20 years ago, I stood on a platform in front of a hostile crowd, thinking my life was over before it had really begun. I had no idea that the best part was about to start. "I'm the lucky one," Xavier said. "I got the sunrise I'd been waiting for, and she's brightened every single one of my days since." "You still say things like that," Willow said with a soft laugh. "After 20 years, you still compare me to sunrise." "Because it's still true," Xavier said simply. "You're still the most beautiful thing I see every morning. That hasn't changed and never will." They stood together watching the celebration, watching their legacy unfold before them. 5 children, 3 grandchildren already with more on the way, a ranch that thrived, a community they had helped build. It was more than either of them had dreamed possible. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar golds and pinks, Xavier pulled Willow closer. "I love you, Willow Irving. I've loved you from that first moment, and I'll love you until my last breath." "I love you too," Willow said. "You saved me, Xavier. You saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I felt worthless. You gave me everything." "No," Xavier said softly. "You gave yourself everything by having the courage to stand there that day, to not give up even when it seemed hopeless. I just recognized what you already were." More years flowed by like the creek on their property, steady and sure. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated more weddings, welcomed more babies into the family. The ranch continued to prosper under William's management, while Winston became a respected lawyer in Sacramento, often taking cases for people who couldn't afford representation otherwise. Wendy and her husband had 4 children who spent every summer on the ranch, learning to ride and rope, absorbing the stories of how their grandmother had come to Coloma with nothing and built a life through courage and determination. The twins expanded their section of the ranch, innovating with new breeding techniques that improved the quality of their stock. Willow finally retired from teaching in 1890, after nearly 30 years in the classroom. The town threw her a grand celebration, with former students coming from all over California to honor her. Men and women in their 30s and 40s stood up and testified to how she had changed their lives, how her teaching had opened doors they never would have found otherwise. "Miss Victoria taught me to read when I was 12 years old," one man said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd been told I was too stupid to learn, but she wouldn't give up on me. She stayed after school every day for months, working with me patiently until the letters made sense. Because of her, I was able to get work as a clerk instead of just menial labor. She changed the entire course of my life." Story after story came out, students whose lives had been transformed by Willow's dedication. Xavier sat beside her, holding her hand, pride radiating from him. When it was his turn to speak, he stood and looked out at the crowded room. "I met my wife on what should have been the worst day of her life," he said. "She was being mocked by a crowd for her appearance, judged before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. But she stood there with her head high, refusing to be broken. I took one look at her and knew I was seeing the sunrise I'd been waiting for my whole life." He turned to look at Willow, his amber eyes still bright despite his age. "She's been my sunrise every day since, bringing light and warmth to everything she touches. And I'm not the only one blessed by her light. All of you, everyone she taught, you've been touched by that same brightness. She saw potential in every child, worth in every student. She gave of herself without reservation, and this community is better for it. I'm better for it. I'm the luckiest man alive because she chose to build a life with me." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Willow stood and embraced Xavier, and the crowd erupted in applause. They spent their later years in comfortable contentment. Xavier gradually turned more of the ranch operations over to William and the twins, though he still rode out most days to check on things. Willow spent her time with grandchildren, teaching them to read, telling them stories, passing on her love of learning. In the quiet moments, she and Xavier would sit on their porch, the same porch where he had proposed all those years ago, and watch the sun set over land they had built into a legacy. They would talk about their children and grandchildren, about memories and dreams, about the life they had created together. "You have any regrets?" Xavier asked one evening when they were both in their 60s, weathered by time but still strong. "Not a single one," Willow said firmly. "Every hard moment led me to you, to this life. How could I regret anything that brought me here?" "I regret that crowd," Xavier said quietly. "The things they said to you that first day, you shouldn't have had to endure that. But it led to you defending me," Willow pointed out. "It led to you calling me Sunrise. That moment changed everything, Xavier. The cruelty was worth it for what came after." "You're more generous than they deserved," Xavier said. "Maybe," Willow allowed. "But I learned long ago that holding on to bitterness only hurts the person holding it. Those people who mocked me, some of them became friends eventually. Others never did, but that's all right too. I don't need everyone to understand or accept me. I just need you." Xavier pulled her close, kissing the top of her head where her hair, still with hints of red despite the white, was soft against his lips. "You'll always have me for as long as I'm breathing." They kept that promise through illness and hardship, through loss and celebration. When Xavier's brother Xander died in 1895, they mourned together. When their first great-grandchild was born a year later, they celebrated together. Through everything, they remained each other's constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. On a warm spring morning in 1902, Xavier woke early as always, compelled by decades of habit to rise with the sun. He lay in bed for a moment, looking at Willow sleeping beside him. Her face was lined with age, her hair mostly white, but to him she was still the woman who had stood defiantly on that platform 40 years ago, still the sunrise he had been waiting for. He got up quietly, not wanting to wake her, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Through the window, he could see the eastern sky beginning to lighten, darkness giving way to that first pale glow. He stepped out onto the porch with his cup, watching the familiar transformation, the one that never got old no matter how many times he witnessed it. The sky shifted from deep purple to pink, then that particular shade of gold that reminded him always of Willow's hair as it had been when they met. The light spread across the land, illuminating the ranch they had built together, the life they had created. Xavier felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude so profound it made his eyes sting. Behind him, he heard the door open. Willow came out, wrapped in a shawl, and settled into the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise together as they had done thousands of times before. "Still beautiful," Willow murmured. "Still my favorite sight," Xavier agreed. "Though the sunrise over the hills runs a close second to the one sitting beside me." Willow laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "You're incorrigible. 40 years married and you still talk like we're courting." "I'll never stop courting you," Xavier said. "Not until they put me in the ground, and maybe not even then if I can help it." They watched the day begin, surrounded by the evidence of their life together. In the corrals, horses moved restlessly, tended by grandchildren and great-nephews who worked the ranch now. In the main house, their children and grandchildren were beginning to stir, another generation of Irvings waking to carry on what Xavier and Willow had started. "We did well," Willow said softly. "Look at all this, Xavier. We built something that will outlast us." "We built something that matters," Xavier agreed. "Not just the ranch, though that's important, but the family, the love, the way we've taught them to treat people. That's the real legacy." William came out of the main house and walked toward them, his own hair graying now though he was only in his late 30s. He smiled when he saw his parents on the porch, a sight as familiar as the sunrise itself. "Morning, Pa, Ma," he called. "Coffee on, always," Xavier called back. "Come join us." William settled on the porch steps, cradling his own cup. "Going to be a busy day. Got cattle to move to the upper pasture, fences to check in the south section. The twins want to talk about breeding stock for next year." "You don't need my input on those things anymore," Xavier said. "You've been running this ranch better than I ever did for years now." "Still like to check with you," William said. "You built this place from nothing. That wisdom doesn't just disappear." They talked for a while about ranch business, but it was comfortable, easy. Xavier offered thoughts when asked, but mostly just listened, proud of the capable man his son had become. Eventually, William went to start his workday, and Xavier and Willow were alone again. "He's doing a fine job," Willow observed. "He learned from the best," Xavier said, then grinned. "He learned from you. All that patience and determination, the way you approach problems methodically, that's all you." "He has your strength," Willow countered. "Your integrity. The way he treats the ranch hands with respect, that's you teaching him to value people." "He has the best of both of us," Xavier concluded. "As do all our children. We made good humans, Willow. Maybe that's the thing I'm most proud of." The years continued their steady march, but Xavier and Willow faced them together. They grew older, moved slower, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, refined by decades of partnership and devotion. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with just a look, were so intertwined that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. In the fall of 1908, Xavier fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious at first, but it lingered and worsened. By winter, he was confined to bed more often than not, his strength failing. Willow nursed him tirelessly, sitting by his bedside for hours, reading to him, talking with him, just being present. Their children gathered, coming from across California to be with their father. The house was full again, 3 generations united by love and concern. Xavier held court from his bed, telling stories, offering advice, making sure everyone knew how proud he was of them. On a cold January morning, with Willow holding his hand and their family surrounding them, Xavier drew his last breaths. He looked at Willow, and even through the pain and fatigue, his amber eyes held that same warmth they had always carried. "Still my sunrise," he whispered. "Still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "And you're still my hero," Willow whispered back, tears streaming down her face. "The man who saw me when I was invisible, who loved me when I thought I was unlovable." "I have loved you every single day, Xavier Irving, and I will love you beyond this life." "Not goodbye," Xavier said, his voice fading. "Just until sunrise. Wait for me there in that first golden light. That's where I'll be." He closed his eyes and slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the love he had spent his life building. Willow held him, her heart breaking even as she felt gratitude for every precious year they had shared. The funeral was huge, hundreds of people coming to pay respects to a man who had been respected throughout the county. But it was the family eulogy that mattered most. William stood before the gathered crowd and told the story of his parents' meeting, of a cowboy who had seen a woman being mocked and had recognized her beauty, her worth, her light. "My father told my mother she was the sunrise he'd been waiting for," William said. "And for 46 years, she was his sunrise every single day. He taught us what real love looks like. Not the easy surface kind, but the deep, enduring love that survives hardship and grows stronger with time. He taught us to see worth in people, to look beyond surface appearances to the heart beneath. That's his legacy, and it's one we'll carry forward." Willow lived for several more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She missed Xavier with an ache that never fully subsided, but she found comfort in the life they had built, in the love that continued beyond death. Every morning, she woke at sunrise and stepped onto the porch, looking at that first golden light and feeling Xavier's presence. She told her great-grandchildren stories about their great-grandfather, about how he had been brave and kind and true. She told them about coming to Coloma as a frightened young woman, about being mocked for her appearance, about a cowboy who had seen beauty where others saw fault. "He saved me," she would say. "Not because I needed saving, though I thought I did at the time, but because he saw who I really was and reflected that back to me. He taught me to see my own worth. That's the greatest gift anyone can give, and that's what I want for all of you. See your worth, know your value, and find someone who reflects your light back to you." On a spring morning in 1912, Willow passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Xavier, in the house they had built together. She was 70 years old, and she had lived a full and remarkable life. Her children found her with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful. They buried her beside Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a stone that read Willow Victoria Irving, beloved wife, mother, teacher. She was the sunrise. At her request, there was no sad funeral, but rather a celebration of life. Former students, now elderly themselves, came and shared stories. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren talked about the lessons she had taught them. The ranch continued under William's management and eventually his children's. The land that Xavier and Willow had built together remained in the family, passed down through generations. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of the power of seeing past surface appearances to the worth beneath. In Coloma, which had grown and changed over the decades, the old schoolhouse was preserved as a historical site. A plaque was placed outside, telling the story of Willow Victoria, the red-haired teacher who had been mocked upon arrival but who had transformed education in the town, teaching hundreds of students over her 3-decade career. The plaque mentioned Xavier too, the cowboy who had defended her, who had seen sunrise where others saw only difference. Their love story became part of the town's history, a reminder of a better way to treat people, of the importance of looking beyond appearance to character. Every spring, on the anniversary of their first meeting, the town held a small ceremony at the schoolhouse, honoring both Willow's contributions to education and Xavier's integrity in standing up for what was right. The Irving Ranch continued to thrive for generations. Great-great-grandchildren who never met Xavier or Willow still knew their story, still understood the foundation of love and respect on which their family was built. The values that Xavier and Willow had instilled, kindness and courage, hard work and integrity, echoed through the decades. And every spring morning, when the sun rose over the California hills and painted the sky in shades of gold, it seemed to glow a little brighter over the Irving Ranch, as if Xavier and Willow's love had become part of the landscape itself, eternal as the sunrise they had so treasured. Their story was one of transformation, not of Willow alone, but of a whole community learning to look beyond surface differences, to see true worth. It was a story of courage, both Willow's in facing a hostile crowd and Xavier's in standing against that crowd when it would have been easier to stay silent. But most of all, it was a story of love, the deep and lasting kind that changes everything it touches. From that first moment on the platform, when a frightened young woman with red hair stood before a mocking crowd, and a cowboy saw beauty where others saw fault, their love had rippled outward, touching countless lives. It had built a family, a ranch, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It had taught children and grandchildren what real love looked like, how it sustained and strengthened, how it saw the best in people and called it forth. And somewhere, in that golden moment when dawn breaks and darkness retreats, when the world is painted in that particular shade that only lasts a few precious minutes, Xavier and Willow's love continued, eternal as the sunrise itself, a light that would never fade.